An Airbus A330, carrying 467 passengers, was crossing the Atlantic on a routine flight when a sudden fire exploded in the cockpit, engulfing the pilots in flames and toxic smoke. With only 45 seconds before losing all visibility and control, the captain had to make impossible decisions while his body burned. Between unbearable pain, failing instruments, and an ocean 10,000 meters below, he had to choose: save himself or save 467 lives that depended on his burning hands. I had 45 seconds. 45 seconds before the smoke would blind me completely. 45 seconds before the flames would melt the controls. 45 seconds to decide whether 467 people would live or die that night over the Atlantic. My hands were burning, literally burning. The smell of my own charred skin mixed with the acrid odor of melting wiring, and I had an impossible choice ahead. My name is Richard Martinez, and for 23 years I flew as captain of wide-body aircraft. That September night I was commanding an Airbus A330-300, transporting 467 passengers and 14 crew members from Los Angeles to Frankfurt. It was a routine red-eye flight, the kind I'd flown hundreds of times before. Clear skies, minimal turbulence, systems functioning perfectly. At 11:47 p.m. we were at 41,000 feet over the middle of the Atlantic, exactly at the most distant point from any airport. It's what we call ETOPS, the critical moment when you're too far to turn back and still too far to quickly push forward. If something goes wrong there, your options are limited. Very limited. My first officer, Jake, had 15 years of experience. Good professional, calm, meticulous. We were talking about his vacation plans for the following month when we heard it. It wasn't an alarm. It was a snap. Dry loud, like someone had broken a thick branch inside the cockpit. What the hell was that? Jake looked around, trying to identify the source of the sound. I was already checking the instruments when I saw it. A small blue spark dancing behind the center panel between our seats. For a fraction of a second, I thought it was a reflection from the instrument lights. But sparks don't dance like that. Sparks don't grow, and that one was growing. "We've got an electrical fire starting," I said, keeping my voice steady while my hand reached for the extinguisher. "Jake, oxygen masks. Now." I didn't finish the sentence. The center panel exploded into flames. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't a wisp of smoke that built up. It was an instantaneous explosion of orange and yellow fire that engulfed the space between our seats, licking the controls, climbing up the ceiling, advancing like a living, hungry creature. The heat was so intense, I felt my skin contract on my face. The extinguisher was in my hand, but when I pressed the trigger, the chemical agent simply passed through the flames with no effect. It was like trying to extinguish hell with a water sprayer. The flames had found something highly flammable, probably the coating of the electrical cables, and were feeding on it with terrifying voracity. "Captain, it's spreading." Jake's voice was muffled by the oxygen mask he'd put on. "I lost navigation instruments." The thick black smoke began filling the cockpit. It wasn't ordinary smoke. It was toxic, loaded with chemical compounds from burned wiring, melted plastic, vaporizing electronic circuits. Even with the oxygen mask, I felt the burning in my eyes, the irritation in my airways. And then I realized we were flying blind with 467 lives depending on us, and we had less than a minute before everything became impossible. The autopilot disconnected. No warning, no progressive alarm, it just disconnected. I felt the yoke come alive in my hands, the aircraft beginning that subtle oscillation that happens when the machine returns control to the human. But this time, it wasn't a planned transition. It was the system dying. "Jake, taking manual control," I shouted, though he was less than a meter from me. The smoke had thickened so much I could barely see his silhouette. "I need you to be my eyes on the instruments. Captain, half the displays are out." His voice carried the first trace of panic. "Artificial horizon dead, altimeter dead, airspeed indicator, flickering." My heart raced, but I forced my breathing to stay regular. 23 years of training, hundreds of emergency simulations, everything converging to this moment. Flying without instruments over the ocean at night, with a fire consuming the cockpit. It was the nightmare scenario every pilot fears and prays never to face. I pressed the radio button, feeling the melted plastic stick to my fingers. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is..." The smoke entered the mask, choking me. I coughed violently. Cockpit fire, losing instruments, 467 souls on board. Approximate position. Static. The radio was dead too. Jake, backup radio. Trying, Captain. Everything's burning. The fire had spread across the ceiling now. Drops of molten plastic fell on us like hellish rain. One hit my left hand, the hand on the yoke, and the pain was so intense I almost let go of the control. I felt the blister form instantly on the skin. But I couldn't let go. If I let go, the aircraft would enter a dive I couldn't recover from without visual references from the instruments. Where are you watching this video from? I thought automatically, as if I was still recording the story. Leave it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My brain was entering survival mode, firing random thoughts to deal with the extreme stress. I forced myself to focus. 30 seconds had passed. Maybe 40. It was impossible to tell. Time had become viscous, stretched. Captain, Jake's voice was high now. Oil temperature on engine 1 rising. 150 degrees. 180. 200. No. If we lost an engine there, we'd be finished. An A330 can fly on one engine, but not without instruments, not without references, not while on fire. Reducing power on engine 1, I shouted, moving the throttles with my right hand, the hand that still worked relatively well. The left was swelling rapidly, pain pulsing in waves that threatened to make me pass out. The smoke was so dense now I couldn't see the yoke in front of me. I was flying by feel, by instinct, by the sensation of the aircraft responding to my commands. 3 degrees of bank to the left. I felt it by the pressure on the seat. I corrected gently. Nose dropping half a degree. I pulled the yoke slightly. Jake, emergency configuration. I need you to turn on everything that still works. Backup batteries, auxiliary systems, anything? I heard him moving frantically at the controls, the metallic clink of circuit breakers being activated, and then, miraculously, a faint light flickered on my primary panel. The artificial horizon came back, ghostly in the smoke, but it was there. I managed to reactivate the backup system, Jake practically shouted with relief. But it's unstable. I don't know how long it'll hold. It didn't matter. 5 seconds of reference was infinitely better than none. I looked at the artificial horizon, confirmed my attitude, adjusted. The aircraft was level. Altitude, 40,800 feet. We'd lost 200 feet. Speed, oscillating between 280 and 320 knots. The fire in the center panel had diminished slightly, not because it was being controlled, but because it had consumed everything combustible there. Now it was migrating, following the electrical cables through the walls, across the ceiling, like a predator chasing prey. Pressurization dropping, Jake announced. 10.5 psi, 10.0, 10.8. If we lost pressurization completely at 41,000 feet, we'd have seconds before passing out from hypoxia. Seconds. And the passengers, even with the oxygen masks that would have dropped automatically, wouldn't have much more time. Emergency descent. I made the decision instantly. Maximum angle. Jake, notify the cabin. I pushed the yoke forward hard, ignoring the stabbing pain in my left hand. The A330 pitched its nose down at an angle that would wake any passenger in panic. The descent rate jumped to 4,000 feet per minute. Please let the masks have dropped. Please let no one panic. Captain, the passengers, Jake shouted. The cabin must be in chaos. No choice. If we don't descend now, everyone dies. Through the cockpit door, even with it closed, I could hear screams. Screams of terror, the kind of sound that never leaves your memory. 467 people in free fall, many still half asleep, waking to a nightmare of oxygen masks, flashing lights, and an abrupt descent. The fire was attacking the circuit breaker panel now. I watched the fuses begin to melt, one by one, small explosions of sparks marking the death of each system. Cabin lights, dead. Entertainment system, dead. Secondary controls, dead. How long? I asked, though I knew Jake had no more answer than I did. For what, Captain? For everything to end, for there to be nothing working. Silence. Then, 2 minutes, maybe 3. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough. We needed at least 15 minutes to descend to a safe altitude, assess the damage, try to establish communication with some control center. 2 or 3 minutes would leave us at 30,000 feet, still dangerously high, still without options. There's a QR code on the screen. My brain fired that automatic thought again. See it? To read later when you land. If you land. I shook my head. Focus. I needed to focus. 35,000 feet, 32,000 feet, 28,000 feet. Speed was increasing dangerously. 340 knots, 360 knots. We were close to maximum operating speed. If we exceeded it, we could cause structural damage that would make the aircraft uncontrollable. I pulled the yoke, smoothing the descent. The rate dropped to 3,000 feet per minute. Better, more controlled, but also slower. Engine 1 still overheating, Jake announced. 220 degrees. If it passes 250, it'll fail. Cutting fuel to engine 1. My hand flew to the controls, closing the valve. It was a desperate gamble. Flying with one engine over the ocean, at night, with failing systems. But one working engine was better than two burned out. Engine 1 groaned, coughed, and died. The sudden silence of its roar was ghostly. Now we only had Engine 2 working alone to keep 467 lives in the air. 25,000 feet. The smoke began to clear a bit. Not much. It was still a toxic haze that burned the eyes, but enough to see Jake clearly for the first time in several minutes. He was pale, sweating, eyes red and watering, but focused. Completely focused on the instruments that still worked. "Captain, we've recovered the backup radio." "Mayday, mayday, mayday," I shouted into the microphone as soon as Jake handed me the headset. "Any station, in-flight emergency. Cockpit fire, one engine inoperative, emergency descent, 467 souls on board. Does anyone copy?" Static. Then, copy. Identification. Identification doesn't matter. I need the nearest airport capable of receiving a wide-body, now. Calculating. Sal Island, Cape Verde. Bearing 085, distance 340 nautical miles, 340 miles. With one engine, with systems dying. Was it possible? I looked at the remaining fuel. Enough if everything went right. But nothing was going right that night. Jake, plotting course to Sal Island. Bearing 085, 20,000 feet. Finally at an altitude where pressurization wasn't critical, but the fire hadn't stopped. It was slower, less voracious, but still alive, still consuming, still threatening, and I had to keep that aircraft flying for another 45 minutes minimum. 45 minutes with a burned hand, dying instruments, and 467 people praying behind me. 32 minutes later, I could see the lights of Sal Island on the horizon. They looked like stars fallen from the sky, twinkling against the darkness of the ocean. Never had something so simple seemed so beautiful. Sal Tower, declaring emergency for immediate landing, absolute priority. My voice was hoarse from the smoke, broken by exhaustion. Fire on board. One engine inoperative, multiple system failures. Copied, emergency declared, runway 01 cleared. Wind 090 at 12 knots, cleared for straight-in approach. Emergency services in position. 17,000 feet. The fire had burned through the ceiling lining, and I could see the exposed metal structure blackened, some parts still glowing red from the heat. Smoke escaped through cracks that didn't exist an hour ago. Jake, landing configuration. Flaps 15, landing gear. I heard the hydraulic groan of the gear descending. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. Small victories, tiny reasons for hope. But then, "Captain, yellow hydraulic system at 0. Green pressure dropping." Without full hydraulics, the controls would become progressively harder. Like driving a car without power steering. Possible, but requiring brutal force. How many PSI in the green system? 1,800, 1,600, 1,400. It was leaking, fast. If it reached 0 before landing, I'd lose the brakes, the flaps, elevator control, everything. "Approach speed," I shouted. "We're not going to get a second chance." Aligning an A330 with a 7,800-foot runway, at night with one engine, without full systems, is like performing heart surgery with boxing gloves. It's technically possible, but the margin for error is invisible. 8,000 feet, 4,000 feet, 2,000 feet. I could see the runway now, an illuminated strip of concrete cutting through the darkness. It looked narrow, so narrow. How was I going to land 70 tons of metal on something so narrow? Folks, if you're enjoying this story, my brain fired again, don't forget to leave a like and comment. Was I delirious? Probably. The pain in my hand, the smoke in my lungs, the adrenaline burning through my system, Everything conspired to make me lose focus, but I couldn't. Not yet. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. Speed 150 knots, Jake announced. 140 knots. Sink rate 700 feet per minute. Too fast. I was sinking too fast. I pulled the yoke, the pain in my left hand exploded like ground glass in the bones, and reduced the sink rate to 400 feet per minute, 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. The runway lights filled my field of vision. I could see every marking, every imperfection in the asphalt. Flare! 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 The computer voice sounded robotic, indifferent to the drama. I pulled the yoke back with everything I had. I felt the aircraft's nose lift. The rear wheels touched the ground first, a heavy but controlled impact. The front wheels followed a second later. Reverse thrust, I shouted. Though we only had one engine to reverse, Jake activated it. Engine 2 roared, spitting reverse thrust, desperately trying to decelerate 70 tons hurtling at 140 knots. Maximum brakes! I pressed the pedals with everything. I felt the vibration through the pedestal, the brake discs overheating, probably glowing red-orange under the wheels. The runway slid beneath us, meters turning into centimeters. 5,900 feet of runway used. 6,500 feet. 7,200 feet. Captain, we're running out of runway. I knew, I could see. The runway end lights approaching like demon eyes in the darkness. 7,700 feet. 7,800 feet. And then, miraculously, wonderfully, the aircraft stopped. 230 feet before the end of the runway. 230 feet between success and catastrophe. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of superheated metal cooling and the crackle of the last flames in the ceiling. Jake, my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Jake, we're on the ground. Yes, Captain, we're on the ground. 47 minutes. We survived for 47 minutes. Yes, sir, we survived. Then I heard it. From the other side of the cockpit door. Applause. Not timid, not polite. Thunderous, explosive applause mixed with sobs and shouts of relief. 467 people celebrating the miracle of being alive. Emergency crews arrived in seconds, white foam covering the aircraft, firefighters climbing into the cockpit. I saw through the smoke that was beginning to be evacuated their expressions of shock when they saw the state of the flight deck, the melted ceiling, the charred panels, flames still flickering in some spots. A paramedic tried to take my left hand. I screamed involuntarily. The pain I'd suppressed for 47 minutes now exploded with full force. Sir, we need to treat this immediately. 2nd and 3rd degree burns. I looked down. My hand looked like melted wax, the skin red and white in obscene patterns, some areas blackened where it had burned deeper. How had I held the yoke like that? How was it possible? The passengers, I asked. Everyone okay? Some minor injuries from the abrupt descent, some panic attacks, but all alive, Captain. All 467. All 467. The words echoed in my mind like a sacred mantra. I let myself be taken to the ambulance, watching Jake be treated by another paramedic. He met my gaze, nodded. A simple gesture that said everything. We did it. Together. We survived. The next days were a haze of hospitals, investigators, journalists, and reports. My left hand required 3 reconstructive surgeries. The right, though less severely burned, was left with permanent scars. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital in Cape Verde before being cleared to return to the US. The investigation revealed the fire started in a short circuit in the environmental control panel, a catastrophic failure in an electrical connector that had gone unnoticed during previous maintenance. The fire spread through electrical cables, whose coating, ironically, should have been flame-resistant, but which a combination of age and thermal fatigue had made vulnerable. The airline issued a statement praising my actions and Jake's. We received commendations. The aircraft manufacturer used the incident to implement new safety guidelines regarding electrical wiring. Articles were written, lectures were given, changes were implemented, but all of that seemed distant, almost irrelevant, compared to what I carried with me every night when I closed my eyes. I returned home to Los Angeles 3 weeks after the incident. My wife, Jennifer, tried to be strong, but I saw her cry when she saw the state of my hands. My kids, Michael, 14, and Emily, 11, didn't know how to react. How do you process the fact that your father almost died burning at 33,000 feet? "Dad, did it hurt a lot?" Michael asked one night, as I tried to hold a fork with bandaged hands to eat dinner. "Yes," I answered honestly. "It hurt. But you know what would hurt more? Knowing I didn't do everything I could to bring those people safely home." He thought about that, then nodded. 14 years old, but he understood something fundamental about responsibility, about choices, about what it really means to have lives depending on you. The airlines offered me medical retirement. The burns, they said, though treatable, would make it difficult to maintain the physical standards necessary to pilot commercial aircraft. There would be movement limitations, possible problems with tactile sensitivity on the controls, medical certification issues. For 2 months I considered accepting. Take my generous compensation, occasional consulting, maybe teach at a flight school. It would be a dignified exit. Honorable. No one would blame me. But then I received a letter. It wasn't from an airline executive or an investigator. It was from a passenger, Sarah Wilson, seat 23F. "Captain Richard," she wrote, "I'm sending this letter because I need you to know what those 47 minutes meant to me. I was returning home after experimental cancer treatment in Germany. It was my last hope. I'd been given a terminal diagnosis by doctors in the US. If we had gone down that night, I would have died without seeing my grandchildren again, without hugging my daughter one more time, without saying goodbye properly." She continued, "But we didn't go down. You brought us home. And now, 6 weeks after the landing, I received news that the treatment worked. I'm in remission. I'm going to see my grandchildren grow up. I'm going to dance at my daughter's wedding. I'm going to have more Christmases, more birthdays, more mornings waking up next to the man I love." Tears ran across the paper as I read. "You didn't just save my life that night, Captain. You saved all the lives I'm still going to touch, all the memories I'm still going to create, all the love I'm still going to give and receive." And there were 466 more people on that plane, each with their own stories, their own futures that you made possible. The letter ended. "Thank you isn't enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have." I cried. There, alone in my office, with my bandaged hands holding that piece of paper, I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, but from something bigger. Purpose, meaning. The visceral understanding that those 47 minutes, all that pain, all that terror, had mattered. I received other letters. A businessman whose son was on that flight, going to study medicine in Germany. A teacher who now teaches 35 children who would have been left without an educator. A musician who has since recorded 2 albums that touched millions of people. Each letter was a reminder. I didn't just save 467 people that night. I saved their children, their friends, their future partners, the future children who would still be born. I saved a domino effect of life that would spread through generations. "Guys," I found myself thinking as I answered each letter, "if you're enjoying following these stories, there's an amazing e-book waiting for you." I smiled ironically. Even in my deepest moments of reflection, that YouTuber habit persisted. But maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe sharing these stories, reaching people, inspiring, educating, maybe that was also part of the purpose. 3 months after the incident, I returned to the flight simulator. My hands still hurt, especially in the cold of the air conditioning. Range of motion was reduced, but I could hold the yoke. I could manipulate the controls. I could fly. It took another 6 months of intensive training and 3 specialized medical evaluations, but eventually I received my certification back. With restrictions, yes. No more solo flights in certain conditions. Always with an experienced first officer. More frequent medical evaluations. But I was flying again. My first flight back was terrifying. Every light that flickered, every strange sound, every small vibration triggered my memory back to that night. I sweated cold through the entire flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco, an hour of silent terror. But we landed smoothly. No drama, no emergencies, just a routine flight, exactly as it should be. Over time, it got easier. Confidence returned gradually. Not completely, there are certain things that change you permanently, but enough. Enough that I could do what I love again, with a new level of respect and gratitude for every uneventful flight. Today, 5 years after that night, I still fly regularly. I still command A330s crossing the Atlantic. And yes, every time I pass over that point where it all happened, approximately 13:25, I pause. I say a silent prayer. I remember 45 seconds that stretched into eternity. Jake still flies too. We run into each other sometimes in the hallways at the base, in the simulators. Occasionally we cross paths on flights. There's a bond there that no words can really capture. He understands, I understand. No one else can really understand those 47 minutes the way we understand them. The scars on my hands are permanent. Wavy patterns of new skin, areas of altered pigmentation, some regions of reduced sensitivity. My kids used to be afraid of them. Now, occasionally, Michael traces the lines with his finger when we talk, as if reading Braille, deciphering a story written in flesh. "Does this hurt, Dad?" he asks. "Not anymore," I answer. And it's true. The physical pain left long ago. But there's another pain, the kind you carry in your soul, not in your skin. The pain of knowing how close we came, the pain of possibilities, of what could have been, of the 467 funerals that almost happened. But there's something else too, something that overcomes the pain. It's the certainty that when it mattered, when everything was at stake, when 467 lives hung in the most delicate balance, I didn't fail. I didn't freeze. I didn't give up. I did my job. I received a call a few months ago from a young pilot, freshly graduated, about to make his first international solo flight as first officer. He was nervous, questioning whether he was ready. "You're going to be ready," I told him. "Not because you know everything, nobody knows everything, but because when something goes wrong, and eventually something will go wrong, maybe not catastrophically, but something, you'll know what to do. You'll feel the aircraft. You'll trust your training. You'll make the right choices. What if I don't know what to do? Then you improvise. You adapt. You use every neuron in your brain, every drop of adrenaline in your blood, every fragment of knowledge you've ever absorbed, and you find a way, because there are people behind you who trusted their lives to you, and you're not going to disappoint them. Like in your flight, the fire, like that flight. Like hundreds of other flights where pilots faced the impossible and found the possible, you join a long lineage of aviators who, when confronted with the choice between giving up and persevering, chose to persevere. Every single time. He thanked me, hung up. I hope my words helped. I hope that when, not if, but when, he faces his own test, he remembers it's possible. That 467 lives were saved with 2 burned hands and 45 seconds of impossible choices. My wife asked me once if I was afraid to fly now. Yes, I admitted, but I'm more afraid of not flying, of letting fear win, of allowing one horrible night to define all the nights that follow. What if it happens again? Then I'll do again what needs to be done, because that's what pilots do. It's what anyone does when lives depend on them. You don't think about the fear. You don't think about the pain. You don't think about the odds. You just act. Years of flying taught me many technical things. How to read instruments, how to manage systems, how to execute procedures. But that night over the Atlantic taught me something different. It taught me about what human beings are capable of when there's no other option. It taught me that limits are more flexible than we think. It taught me that heroism isn't the absence of fear, but action despite fear. 45 seconds to decide, 47 minutes to execute, 5 years to really understand what happened. And you know what I realized? Those 45 seconds never really ended. They continue, echoing through every choice I make, every flight I command, every time I see the sun rise through the cockpit window as we cross continents at 41,000 feet. Because it wasn't just my life that changed that night. It was 467 lives. And all the lives those lives touch, and all the lives those will touch. It's a circle that expands infinitely, like ripples on a lake, reaching shores I'll never see. Sometimes I wonder about the choices I didn't make. What if I'd hesitated? What if I'd tried to reach for help before acting? What if I'd prioritized my safety over controlling the aircraft? But those questions are useless. I made the choices I made. They worked. And now I carry both the scars and the gratitude of knowing that when my moment came, the moment that defines a pilot, that reveals who you really are under extreme pressure, I rose to the occasion. So, next time you board an airplane, look at that cockpit door. Know that on the other side are 2 human beings who, if necessary, will burn their own hands to keep yours safe. Who will fly blind if they have to? Who will find runways on lost islands in the middle of the ocean? Who have 45 seconds trained in their souls for the day everything goes wrong? And who, despite the fear, despite the pain, won't give up on you? This is a story based on real aviation events, but elements were altered and dramatized for narrative purposes. Names, specific locations, and some technical details were modified to protect the privacy of those involved. If this story touched you like it touched me telling it, subscribe to Black Box to hear more true stories from the skies. Leave in the comments where you're watching from and what aviation story you'd like to hear next. Until the next flight, until the next story of courage in the skies.